Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening from wherever you're watching or listening. My name is Caleb Glick. I'm a lawyer here in the great state of Texas with the Calhoun School of Law to bring you a lot of information plenty of bad folks would rather you not have. And today, ladies and gentlemen, we'll be making another installation into our Anti-Federalist Papers series going on number 25. So if you haven't gone back and watched 1 through 24, I would highly encourage you to do so, because understanding the Anti-Federalist Papers, in addition to the Federalist Papers, which we recently just capped off, will provide you a very advantageous and well-rounded understanding of the U.S. Constitution, and understanding the U.S. Constitution is absolutely necessary if you intend to combat or defend against any sort of lawfare that will be waged against you, your loved ones, or your hard-earned property. So let's go ahead and jump on over to the Anti-Federalist Papers. There are multiple institutions from which you can get a paper and digital copy of the Anti-Federalist Papers. Go ahead and do that. And if you haven't already, go ahead and pick up a copy of the Federalist Papers so you can join us in comparing and contrasting the arguments for and against ratifying the U.S. Constitution. Excellent. So Anti-Federalist number 25 is titled Objections to a Standing Army, Part 2. From the 10th letter of Brutus, appearing in the New York Journal on January 24th, 1788, he says this: "The liberties of a people are in danger from a large standing army, not only because the rulers may employ them for the purposes of supporting themselves in any usurpations of power which they may see proper to exercise." Doesn't that sound familiar? "But there is great hazard that an army will subvert the forms of the government under whose authority they are raised, and establish one according to the pleasure of their leaders, a coup d'etat." That's what it's called, a coup d'etat. "We are informed in the faithful pages of history of such events frequently happening. 2 instances have been mentioned in a former paper. They are so remarkable that they are worthy of the most careful attention of every lover of freedom. They are taken from the history of the 2 most powerful nations that have ever existed in the world, and who are the most renowned for the freedom they enjoyed and the excellency of their constitutions. I mean Rome and Britain. In the first, the liberties of the Commonwealth were destroyed, and the Constitution overturned by an army led by Julius Caesar, who was appointed to the command by the constitutional authority of that Commonwealth. He changed it from a free republic, whose fame is still celebrated by all the world, into that of the most absolute despotism. A standing army effected this change, and a standing army supported it through a succession of ages, which are marked in the annals of history with the most horrid cruelties, bloodshed, and carnage, the most devilish, beastly, and unnatural vices that ever punished or disgraced human nature. So not only are standing armies beneficial to a tyrant, but the standing armies in and of themselves have multiple times been known to overthrow legitimate republican governments, coup d'etats. The same army that in Britain vindicated the liberties of that people from the encroachments and despotism of a tyrant king assisted Cromwell, their general, in wresting from the people that liberty they had so dearly earned. So maybe don't be so quick to think the army is on your side. Don't be so quick to think these armed forces are your allies. Because kind of like what the Anti-Federalists have said time and time again, if only men were angels, then we could trust anybody and everybody and we wouldn't need government. But because standing armies are made of men who are not angels, they also have to be scrutinized, and they also have to be put in check. You may be told these instances will not apply to our case, but those who would persuade you to believe this either mean to deceive you or have not themselves considered the subject. Go ahead and highlight that. Tidbit of wisdom there. Either you haven't seen it firsthand, or you're the one trying to bring about the despotism. I firmly believe no country in the world had ever a more patriotic army than the one which so ably served this country in the late war. So he's not harpooning, he's not lambasting, he's not critiquing the good men who fought the American Revolution. But had the general who commanded them been possessed of the spirit of a Julius Caesar or a Cromwell, the liberties of this country might have, in all probability, terminated with the war. So 1 in a million. probably the singular individual of that generation to restrain himself just long enough, Mr. George Washington, to yes, command the army, but not to then become a king, is so rare, is so infrequent, that it should not be the trusted pattern. Or bad, they've been maintained. They might have cost more blood and treasure than was expected in the conflict with Great Britain. When an anonymous writer addressed the officers of the army at the close of the war, advising them not to part with their arms until justice was done them, the effect it had is well known. It affected them like an electric shock. He wrote like Caesar and had the commander-in-chief and a few more officers of rank countenance the measure. The desperate resolution might have been taken to refuse to disband. What the consequences of such a determination would have been, heaven only knows. The army were in the full vigor of health and spirits, in the habit of discipline, and possessed of all our military stores and apparatus. They would have acquired great accessions of strength from the country. Those who were disgusted at our republican forms of government, such there then were of high rank among us, would have lent them all their aid. We should in all probability have seen a constitution and laws dictated to us at the head of an army, and at the point of a bayonet, and the liberties for which we had so severely struggled snatched from us in a moment. That is so incredibly important to remember. It remains a secret yet to be revealed whether this measure was not suggested, or at least countenanced by some, who have bad great influence. That's a weird way to word that. Let's read it one more time. Who have bad great influence in producing the present system. Fortunately indeed for this country, it had at the head of the army a patriot as well as a general, George Washington. And many of our principal officers had not abandoned the characters of citizens by assuming that of soldiers, and therefore the scheme proved abortive. But are we to expect that this will always be the case? Here is what's so important. Are we so much better than the people of other ages and of other countries, that the same allurements of power and greatness which led them aside from their duty will have no influence upon men in our country? We've seen it time and time again in history, and it's going to happen to us again. Such an idea is wild and extravagant. It's absurd to think we are immune to the patterns of history. Had we indulged such a delusion, enough has appeared in a little time past to convince the most credulous that the passion for pomp, power, and greatness works as powerfully in the hearts of many of our better sort as it ever did in any country under heaven. So even the best among us are still susceptible to this corruption. Were the same opportunity again to offer, we should very probably be grossly disappointed if we made dependence that all who then rejected the overture would do it again. From these remarks, it appears that the evils to be feared from a large standing army in time of peace do not arise solely from the apprehension that the rulers may employ them for the purpose of promoting their own ambitious views, but that equal, and perhaps greater danger, is to be apprehended from their overturning the constitutional powers of the government and assuming the power to dictate any form they please. So not only is it bad for the government to have this large enforcement arm, but also the enforcement arm may turn against the government. The advocates for power in support of this right in the proposed government urge that a restraint upon the discretion of the legislatures in respect to military establishments in time of peace would be improper to be imposed, because they say it will be necessary to maintain small garrisons on the frontiers to guard against the depredations of the Indians and to be prepared to repel any encroachments or invasions that may be made by Spain or Britain. He's directly addressing, I think, what Hamilton said in Federalist Paper 27, 28. Well, we can check it in the recap video of the Federalist Papers, but he's directly talking about the supposed dangers on the West that the Federalists were warning about. Okay? You don't need a standing army to address that, to deal with that, is what Brutus is saying here. Of the Indians, and to be prepared to repel any encroachments or invasions that may be made by Spain or Britain. So it was Spain, not the Dutch. The amount of this argument, stripped of the abundant verbiages with which the author has dressed it, is this. It will probably be necessary to keep up a small body of troops to garrison a few posts, which it will be necessary to maintain in order to guard against the sudden encroachments of the Indians or of the Spaniards and British. And therefore the general government ought to be invested with power to raise and keep up a standing army in time of peace without restraint at their discretion. I confess, I cannot perceive that the conclusion follows from the premises. Logicians say it is not good reasoning to infer a general conclusion from particular premises, hasty generalization. Though I am not much of a logician, a tough word to pronounce for me, it seems to me this argument is very like that species of reasoning. When the patriots in the Parliament in Great Britain contended with such force of argument and all the powers of eloquence against keeping up standing armies in time of peace, it is obvious they never entertained an idea that small garrisons on their frontiers or in the neighborhood of powers from whom they were in danger of encroachments, or guards to take care of public arsenals, would thereby be prohibited. The advocates for this power further urge that it is necessary, because it may, and probably will happen, that circumstances will render it requisite to raise an army to be prepared to repel attacks of an enemy before a formal declaration of war which in modern times has fallen into disuse. If the Constitution prohibited the raising an army until a war actually commenced, it would deprive the government of the power of providing for the defense of the country until the enemy were within our territory. If the restriction is not to extend to the raising armies in cases of emergency, but only to the keeping them up, this would leave the matter to the discretion of the legislature, and they might, under the pretense that there was danger of an invasion, keep up the army as long as they judged proper, and hence it is inferred that the legislatures should have authority to raise and keep up an army without any restriction. But from these premises, nothing more will follow than this, that the legislature should not be so restrained as to put it out of their power to raise an army, when such exigencies as are instanced shall arise. But it does not thence follow that the government should be empowered to raise and maintain standing armies at their discretion, as well in peace as in war. If indeed it is impossible to vest the general government with the power of raising troops to garrison the frontier posts, to guard arsenals, or to be prepared to repel an attack, when we saw a power preparing to make one without giving them a general and indefinite authority to raise and keep up armies without any restriction or qualification, then this reasoning might have weight. But this has not been proved, nor can it be. It is admitted that to prohibit the general government from keeping up standing armies while yet they were authorized to raise them in case of exigency would be an insufficient guard against the danger. A discretion of such latitude would give room to elude the force of the provision. It is also admitted that an absolute prohibition against raising troops, except in cases of actual war, would be improper, because it will be requisite to raise and support a small number of troops to garrison the important frontier posts and to guard arsenals, and it may happen that the danger of an attack from a foreign power may be so imminent as to render it highly proper we should raise an army in order to be prepared to resist them. But to raise and keep up forces for such purposes and on such occasions is not included in the idea of keeping up standing armies in times of peace. It is a thing very practicable to give the government sufficient authority to provide for these cases, and at the same time to provide a reasonable and competent security against the evil of a standing army. A clause to the following purpose would answer the end. As standing armies in time of peace are dangerous to liberty, I think it's supposed to be are. As standing armies in time of peace are dangerous to liberty, and have often been the means of overturning the best constitutions of government, no standing army or troops of any description whatsoever shall be raised or kept up by the legislature except so many as shall be necessary for guards to the arsenals of the United States, or for garrisons to such posts on the frontiers as it shall be deemed absolutely necessary to hold, to secure the inhabitants and facilitate the trade with the Indians. Unless when the United States are threatened with an attack or invasion from some foreign power, in which case the legislature shall be authorized to raise an army to be prepared to repel the attack, provided that no troops whatsoever shall be raised in time of peace without the assent of 2/3 of the members composing both houses of the legislature. A clause similar to this would afford sufficient latitude to the legislature to raise troops in all cases that were really necessary, and at the same time competent security against the establishment of that dangerous engine of despotism, a standing army. Let's go ahead and highlight that, just because of how succinctly that is put. And at the same time, competent security against the establishment of that dangerous engine of despotism. That dangerous engine of despotism. What an aptly fitting description of a standing army. The same writer who advances the arguments I have noticed makes a number of other observations with a view to prove that the power to raise and keep up armies ought to be discretionary in the general legislature. Some of them are curious. He instances the raising of troops in Massachusetts and Pennsylvania to show the necessity of keeping a standing army in time of peace. The least reflection must convince every candid mind that both these cases are totally foreign to his purpose. Massachusetts raised a body of troops for 6 months, at the expiration of which they were to disband. This looks very little like a standing army. But beside, was that Commonwealth in a state of peace at that time? So far from it, that they were in the most violent commotions and contests, and a legislature had formally declared that an unnatural rebellion existed within the state. The situation of Pennsylvania was similar. A number of armed men had levied war against the authority of the state and openly avowed their intention of withdrawing their allegiance from it. To what purpose examples are brought of states raising troops for short periods in times of war or insurrections on a question concerning the propriety of keeping up standing armies in times of peace, the public must judge. It is further said that no danger can arise from this power being lodged in the hands of the general government, because the legislatures will be a check upon them to prevent their abusing it. How'd that turn out? This is offered, as what force there is in it will hereafter receive a more particular examination. At present, I shall only remark that it is difficult to conceive how the state legislatures can, in any case, hold a check over the general legislature in a constitutional way. The latter has, in every instance to which their powers extend, complete control over the former. The state legislatures can, in no case by law, resolution, or otherwise of right, prevent or impede the general government from enacting any law, or executing it, which this Constitution authorizes them to enact or execute. If, then, the state legislatures check the general legislature, it must be by exciting the people to resist constitutional laws. In this way, every individual, or every body of men, may check any government, in proportion to the influence they may have over the body of the people, but such kinds of checks as these, though they sometimes correct the abuses of government, more often destroy all government. It is further said that no danger is to be apprehended from the exercise of this power, because it is lodged in the hands of representatives of the people. If they abuse it, it is in the power of the people to remove them, and choose others who will pursue their interests. That it is unwise in any people to authorize their rulers to do what, if done, would prove injurious. I have in some former numbers shown the representation in the proposed government will be a mere shadow without the substance. I am so confident that I am well founded in this opinion that I am persuaded if it was to be adopted or rejected upon a fair discussion of its merits without taking into contemplation circumstances extraneous to it as reasons for its adoption, 19/20ths of the sensible men in the Union would reject it on this account alone, unless its powers were confined to much fewer objects than it embraces. Signed, Brutus. Excellent. So that's all Mr. Brutus had to say in number 25. If you have any questions about what he was saying in 25, maybe questions about what was said in the preceding papers, or there's a topic you'd like me to cover in a future lecture, go ahead and post those down in the comments, because the entire purpose of the Calhoun School of Law is to provide you with the necessary skills and information to combat any sort of lawfare that will be waged against you, your loved ones, or your hard-earned property. So please, if you have any questions at all, go ahead and post them in the comments. Excellent. So my name is Caleb Glick. I'm a lawyer here in the great state of Texas with the Calhoun School of Law to bring you a lot of information that plenty of bad folks would rather you not have. I hope you enjoyed this lecture, and if not, while you're down in the comments, go ahead and let me know how I can do better so I can best serve that purpose of helping you. I hope you'll have a wonderful day, and I'm not sure what the topic for the next lecture is going to be, but I'll do my best to make it as informative and entertaining as this one, if not more so. Regardless of the topic of the next lecture, until I see y'all then, I bid you all farewell.